Curtis Duncan, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast for the second time. And I'm going to let the audience know that I was about, I suppose, 2 years ago, you were the first video episode that we had ever done. And so now you are back for your second video episode as well. So welcome here, welcome back, all of that kind of stuff.
Thanks again. I appreciate it. I appreciate coming on the second time. I know it's going to be just as cool as it was the first time.
All right. So for those who don't remember you, why don't we start off by telling the audience about your background and education, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, my name is Curtis Duncan. I am originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I got my undergraduate degree from Hampton University, a small school in Virginia. And then I later got my master's of business administration from Clark Atlanta, which is a school here in Atlanta, Georgia. And as far as me getting into health, it was something that I've always had an interest in, particularly when I was like younger. I just never subscribed to the belief that it was preordained for people to get sick and have diabetes and heart disease and et cetera. So it was always a thing where I wanted to learn more because I didn't accept that standard wisdom that, there's a flu season and when you get old, you got to die of heart disease. And I just didn't believe that. So I took it upon myself just to do a lot of research. And, of course, when you're 18 or you're young, you first learn about giving up soda. So that's the first thing I did. And that was, that simple move, I think at an early age was really profound and, helped me later on in life. Because, I never really knew how deadly sugar was in particularly high fructose corn syrup. So, I just made some simple changes. And then I think when I was 20, I, came across a PETA website. And talking about meat and animals and cholesterol. I'm like, wow, I didn't, man, I'm killing myself. Oh my God, I'm stressing. So when I was in college, I became like a starchitarian because there really is no such thing as a vegetarian. They're really starchitarians. They're just consuming grains, so they're grainitarians. You can call them that. So I gave up eating meat and I was eating just all this bread and peanut butter and raisins, just, loading myself with a whole bunch of carbs and grains. And then I quit because I lost a lot of weight and I didn't really like the way I looked. And it was kind of hard to do it in college because I wasn't at one of those trendy schools either. So they didn't have any scrambled tofu for breakfast. They didn't have none of that.
Just to interrupt you real quick, I don't know if you noticed it. I put out an article this week about the whole vegan vegetarian thing. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I saw the whole post. It was profound. It was very profound.
Okay, well, I didn't realize that you saw it. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So and then later on, essentially around this time is when I was just learning more and more about health overall. Just, it was about maybe been close to about almost 12 years now. And, and I was, again, a raw foodist / vegetarian for about almost 4 years from the time I was 23 to the time I was almost 26. And, and still, I was learning a lot because it was never to me about being a vegan or being attached to some type of identity. It was more so about health. And I was brainwashed to believe that being a vegan raw foodist was better for your health, which it definitely is not. But I was still learning a lot. I was learning about chemicals, and which we'll be talking about today. I was learning about chemicals and fluoride and vaccines and soy and a whole bunch of health-related topics. So That's kind of my background. I'm just completely just a lot of independent research and a lot of things I've just been able to find on my own just by doing lots and lots of research.
All right, so why did you quit being a vegan?
Well, I quit being a vegan because I realized that it wasn't healthy to become a vegan. When I first started off, when I first started off doing it for health reasons, so that was my primary reason for becoming a vegetarian. And I discovered later on that it wasn't so healthy. That cholesterol is not bad for you, saturated fat's not bad for you, and just look at simple research. Human beings have been eating meat now for close to almost 2.1 million years. So if meat was the cause of all these diseases, then human beings would have been diseased for the past 2.1 million years. But we haven't been. We've been relatively healthy up until the age of agriculture, which is when we started consuming a lot more grains, wheat, rice, corn, etc. And that's when we got shorter, our brains got smaller, and we started living our life expectancy decreased actually. So I just came across a lot of research that kind of contradicted everything I was brainwashed to believe. Because with the vegan movement, it's not none of it's based upon science. It's all based upon someone's beliefs, someone's superstitious beliefs.
Yeah, well, one thing that I've noticed on that point is that veganism, vegetarianism too, but especially veganism, they're centered around cities, so it's sort of an urban religion. You don't find it where heavy manual labor is required. Just because you can't stop and eat every 30 to 40 minutes if you're out, doing real labor and stuff like that. Whereas, on a vegan diet, you just burn the stuff up so quickly. But uh, you know, they're always using some sort of moral superiority complex argument and or religious argument. We're better, more spiritual than you because we don't eat meat. And there's so many underlying factors with that I related in my new article that aren't, discussed by these groups of people. But there's all of these underlying issues there, and veganism is really, especially to children, probably the most detrimental thing that one can do.
Absolutely, I totally agree. For young children, veganism, it doesn't give them, because I mean, veganism is essentially a starvation diet. So it's a diet that, people can, it's a diet of lack. So you're not giving the body what it truly needs, the essential amino acids, the essential fatty acids in particular, those two things, which are really key for brain development, because for most people, our brain develops within the first 1 to 6 years of our life. So if we're not getting omega-3 fats, if we're not getting enough protein, if of course, most vegetarians will give their children breast milk, but will have something wrong with giving their children cow's milk. Not to say they should give their children infant formula, but if you're not getting those essential things when you're developing as a child, then you're going to be screwed for life. Essentially, you're going to have all types of neurological disorders. Of course, vitamin B12 deficiencies. Your brain will be shrunk as a result of it because your brain won't properly develop. So you're definitely going to have some serious, particularly psychological issues because the vegan diet does significant amounts of damage to the brain. It actually shrinks the brain, makes the brain smaller. So.
Well, and we should probably explain why that is, and that's because the brain is actually about 77% hydroxycholesterol, and it burns saturated fats. And hydroxycholesterol comes from HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol from meats and dairy and all of those sorts of things. But it doesn't do well on polyunsaturated fats, which is what all of those seed oils are.
Hmm. And those polyunsaturated fats, because there's always this assumption that vegans are more spiritual. Those polyunsaturated fats are actually linked to homicide and suicide, whereas the omega-3 fats, which are found in the animal foods, the grass-fed beef, the fatty fish, those are linked to pro-social behaviors, and they actually decrease your risk of suicide and depression. So vegetarians, they're more likely to be mentally ill. They're more likely to be suicidal, homicidal. and they're more likely to suffer from depression along with schizophrenia
You know,
as a result.
that's really interesting that you say that, because consider this for a second, Curtis. What if okay, so all of these cults and religions typically try to take care of the diet. Okay, so a lot of them, in fact, use a strict vegan or vegetarian diet. So what if these chemical imbalances in the brain then lead to hallucinations, which then the church or institution or cult, which then would say, hey, these are the sign, these are visions about our God, our religion, you're following along with us. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Absolutely, yeah. Essentially, if you want to indoctrinate people, then the best way to do it is to have, them on a vegan diet, so their brain will get shrunker. So, they're being dumbed down, so they're more receptive to whatever, BS that you're shoveling in front of them, and they'll eat it up. They'll eat it up because, their brains have been shrunk and they've been dumbed down. And along with the hallucinations that you mentioned as a result of being on the vegetarian diet, then they'll think that there's somehow this will confirm what their cult leader will teach them. So absolutely, I totally agree.
All right. So how and okay, are we finished with why you quit being a vegan? I was going to ask you how veganism and raw foodism is mind control cult essentially.
Yeah, it's a mind control cult because essentially, you know, you're brainwashed when they use a lot of scare tactics to get people to become vegans. So the first scare tactic is, well, it causes heart disease. It's just a blanket, no proof. It's just, and they're using the same faulty science that was, invented by Ansel Keys, who was financed by the sugar industry. They're using that same faulty science to just scare people. It's gonna kill you. It's gonna give you diabetes. It's gonna give you cancer. Anything you can think of. The vegetarian movement, they say meat is the cause of all health problems, essentially. So that's the first scare tactic, which is part of mind control. Then they use guilt tactics. So when the fear doesn't work, they use the guilt. So, do you want to be like, a food Nazi? You want to be killing animals for your own pleasure? And they use all these scare tactics on people. So a lot of people are like, yeah, okay, well, okay, so the meat causes heart disease, okay, and then they get guilted, like, oh man, I'm not trying to kill animals, and boy, the chickens are just being slaughtered, and their heads, beaks are being ripped off, so they use the guilt tactics on people, and then they just use flat out lies. Human beings have been herbivores. 2.1 million years ago, human beings are naturally herbivores. That's why we don't have canine teeth, or, which we actually do. Human beings, can't digest meat, which makes no sense because if human beings cannot digest fat and protein, which is essentially what meat is, then human beings should not be able to digest hemp, soy, nuts, oatmeal, fruits, vegetables. They should not be able to digest anything, any type of plant-based foods whatsoever, because those foods also contain fat and protein. So they use all these they use fear, they use guilt, and they use flat out
Meat
lies.
eating promotes ferocious behavior, and which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
which I've heard, but ironically, it's like, well, and I don't really want to go too far into this, but then of course you hear the stories that Hitler was definitely a vegetarian, as much of the World War II stuff as you can believe, etc. But so then, it's like, well, what about these things? It's very selective in the case histories that they promote. But I would add one more thing to what you've just said there, Curtis, is that they'll especially like these Buddhists and New Age Buddhists, New Age spiritualists, etc. They'll use in their even on other talk shows that you're more spiritually evolved if you don't eat meat and saturated fats.
Yeah, which is complete propaganda. Because
Sure.
again, how can you be spiritually evolved if you're having mental illness?
Well,
You know,
right,
and
and how is it spiritually evolved? And there's a few different levels here that we should bounce back and forth on. But um, if you're starving your children from necessary nutrients for their development, how is that spiritual? How is deficiency supposed to be some spiritual gain or enlightenment. That doesn't make sense. But as well, just it always with the moral superiority complex arguments, but soy, which I know you are just about to talk about, and you and I have talked about in the past, and I've talked on my show about before, is filled with estrogen. And not only that, but I interviewed Daniela Martin a couple of years ago on entomophagy and insects. Not eating insects is dumb, and she talks about how these large factory farms for corn and soy and all of this stuff, they actually wreak havoc on the environment. And one, they're GMO, and so they poison things in the environment. But number two, the tractors and everything destroy the small wildlife, the lizards and insects and small mammals and all of that stuff are going to get wiped out every time those tractors go through there. So birds, all of that stuff. So there's so many different levels where just because you get your food out of a wrapper doesn't necessarily mean that it's more, spiritual and you're more highly evolved, and then you can look down on everyone else because you can preach this, dark magic or whatever.
Yeah, that's just vegan narcissism. That's all. Because most narcissists, they think they're better than others for whatever it is they're doing. So that's all that is. I mean, that's why I've considered veganism to be eating disorder, because most people who have eating disorders also have self-esteem problems. So, and narcissism is usually a sign of low self-esteem. You're trying to, put yourself on a pedestal because you feel low. And again, I mean, I think the vegetarian diet accelerates that narcissism because, it causes you to have all types of brain and mental issues. You become more aggressive, more overzealous. Everything is just, I remember my days when I was vegetarian. I was extremely overzealous, extremely controlling, extremely, just like no one really wanted to be around me because I was acting such an asshole. So,
I think I'll chime in and say I'm with you on that one. I was there too. So,
yeah. So, and then when you add other aspects of it, the whole cult-like following behind it, I'm a vegan and, this, that, and the third, and people creating Facebook names, hipster vegan and whatever, all these silly Facebook names, it becomes an ego identity. So it's really hard for people to break that, even when it's not working for them, even when they look like hell, even when, they're sick, it just becomes hard to break from the mind control.
And how is veganism all about population control and eugenics?
Because the vegetarian diet is a great way to sterilize people. The vegetarian diet essentially, particularly when it's a soy-based diet, because most modern vegetarian diets are soy-based diet. And when you incorporate soy, particularly genetically modified soy, which most of the soy that's being grown all throughout the world is genetically modified, that causes multi-generational infertility. It also causes multi-generational infertility in men and women. And this is particularly bad for men because most infertility in this country is correlated with low sperm counts. It's not actually due to the women, because men, we produce, bucket loads of sperm, literally. Whereas women, they only produce maybe about X number of eggs within their lifetime. But men, we are constantly producing sperm. So that sperm is of a low quality and we don't have high enough count to fertilize a woman, then essentially what you have is people being infertile, which, infertility is skyrocketing within this country, largely due not only to the vegetarian diet, but to GMOs. And the vegetarian diet, even without soy, since it is a diet of, a starvation diet, you can't really, when your body's in starvation mode, the last thing it's worried about doing is reproducing, because, it's in starvation mode. So it's not going to generate enough sex hormones, and particularly testosterone, to be able to produce healthy amounts of sperm. So for example, a lot of women who get on the vegetarian diet, they oftentimes go into menopause, which is unnatural, particularly if you're like at the age of 30. And a lot of men, particularly if they're not getting enough saturated fats and protein, which, the vegetarian diet is very low in that, you are not going to produce enough healthy sperm in order to be able to fertilize a woman. So that's why, the UN and some of these other organizations are calling for a diet that excludes meat, dairy, and, just basically all animal foods. Of course, they're doing it under the guise of climate change, but the real objective is to lower population. So that's the reason why the vegetarian diet is about eugenics.
Yeah, and it's always about pushing people down and blaming them for the problems that were caused by putting them on this sort of diet in the first place. And it they've in the 60s they want everybody into the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then there's this huge population explosion from all of the rampant LSD sex parties, and then they blame us for, which the CIA created and put on, and then they blame us for the out of control population due to the 60s. It's just idiocy. Anyway,
So,
that's what happens when you give a bunch of psychopaths the power to make decisions for the rest of the population, or at least the assumed power. So why are vegan mothers more likely to have homosexual children? And what research do you have for this to back this?
well, one of the primary reference points that I use, just a lot of my research into endocrine disruptors, is the book The Whole Soy Story. The book is called The Whole Soy Story. It's by Dr. Kyla Daniels, I believe. And it's by another, it's also co-authored by someone else. I don't remember their name. But in this book, it describes how mothers, for example, who are vegetarians, and again, most vegetarian women are still consuming heavy amounts of soy. They have sons with smaller penises, and the reason for that is because they have a condition known as hypospadia. Hypospadia is a genital defect where the penis oftentimes grows to be no bigger than 2 inches, and the actual urethra is on the side of the penis instead of at the top. And this is one of the common conditions that happens with a lot of vegetarian mothers. This was a study that was done, I believe, in 1970s in England. And again, that was at the time when soy was like the miracle food. Everyone was eating soy. So essentially, when you're on a vegetarian diet, you're consuming a lot of soy, and soy is estrogen. And what estrogen does, not only does it harm, male reproductive development, it also blocks testosterone in the womb. So without adequate amounts of testosterone, that fetus will not turn into a male, will not have a brain and the gender identity of a man, essentially, because the testosterone will literally masculinizes the brain to make that man essentially have the gender identity of a male. So what happens is when you're consuming heavy amounts of soy, then that testosterone is blocked. So it automatically has the brain of a female, because all fetuses are essentially females until the testosterone kicks in and turns the ovaries into testicles, the clitoris into a penis, closes, the cavity, which would be a vagina within a woman, and that's just how, and also it masculinizes the brain. So that testosterone is blocked, then he will be a man, if you will, but will be attracted to other men because he will have the gender identity of a woman. And it works. It works in a similar fashion, but different fashion for women, because the estrogen actually, how it works is that the testosterone goes to the brain and it gets converted by a process known as aromatization into estriol, and that masculinizes the brain. So if that testosterone is blocked, then that masculinization will never occur. Now, within a female fetus, if there are any unnatural estrogens, which soy is an unnatural estrogen, then that estrogen would actually go into the brain and masculinize the brain in the same way that it will occur in a male fetus in the presence of testosterone. So that's why these chemicals, ones mimic estrogen, they feminize men essentially within the womb, and they masculinize women because it is the estrogen which actually masculinizes the brain. So in the female fetus, it's going to masculinize the brain and have women become a lesbian. Within a male fetus, it's the estrogen is going to block the testosterone because estrogen is a more dominant hormone. It's going to block the testosterone, so there will be no masculinization process that will occur within the male fetus.
So let's talk about soy infant formula and how it can make babies gay and cause infertility. What do you want to talk about that? And how does it? Let's also talk about how it predisposes girls to breast cancer.
Yeah, the reason why it can, and again, this information comes from the whole soy story as well. It can, cause a boy to be, to be gay or babies to be gay. It's because of that same process of the high amounts of estrogen and the fact that, once the baby first comes out the womb, his brain is still developing, so he's still undergoing a masculinization process. A baby boy, for example, would be. So if that process is blocked by estrogen, then that masculinization would occur. So there is a possibility, and this information comes from Dr. Russell Blaylock and from the whole soy story, that the boy will later become, he'll like want to play with dolls. He'll essentially be more feminine in his play, in his gender play. And the same thing would occur for female babies because they're being exposed to so much estrogen. Then they will undergo a masculinization process because of all the unnatural estrogens that they're being exposed to at such a very early age when their brain is still developing and and potentially their gender identity is still forming. Now, for baby boys and for girls, when they're exposed to all this estrogen, then, as I mentioned, the baby is still developing. So along with that are the Sertoli cells, which are the cells within our bodies that produce testosterone and are largely responsible for our ability to produce sperm later on in life. So if those cells are destroyed by soy and by the soy estrogens at a very early age, which happens, when people get on soy infant formula, then that will cause infertility. And it has been shown that exposing a baby boy to soy infant formula makes his testicles smaller. It, essentially shrinks the testicles. And now in girls, what it does is it will predispose them to endometriosis and fibroids, which are two conditions of the uterus, which are linked to infertility. And both of these conditions are estrogen dependent. And that's the reason why being exposed to soya estrogens at a very early age also causes breast cancer, because that's when the breasts are also developing as well. So if they are exposed, hyper exposed to large amounts of estrogen, then later on in life, that woman will likely develop breast cancer, later on in life when she turns 40 or 30, etc., because of the early exposures to soy, for example, because soy is one of the most powerful endocrine disrupting chemicals out there. So that's why, the fact that it'll cause endometriosis and fibroids within women, and then the fact that, the female breast cells are being exposed to estrogen, which, as I mentioned, breast cancer is the estrogen dependent disease. They're being exposed to that at a very early age that will predispose her to develop breast cancer later on in life.
All right, and let's discuss the history of endocrine disrupting chemicals and how they're produced by products of the oil industry.
So endocrine disrupting chemicals are, they're known as estrogen mimics, but their official scientific name is endocrine disruptors. They essentially have been around for the past 100 years. And there's close to about 80,000 different chemicals that are on the market now. And, most of these products are byproducts of the oil industry. And in particular, they're created from benzene. So, for example, bisphenol A, which is a major chemical we'll talk about later on the show, that is derived from benzene. So that's why oil companies, BP, ExxonMobil, Chevron, they make large amounts of money off of selling some of the byproducts of their oil drilling, just like they sell Vaseline. And Vaseline is a byproduct of oil drilling, essentially. So most of these chemicals are petroleum based. In particular, they are derived from benzene. And these chemists, chemists or scientists, you can call them, they take the benzene and they'll add, they'll do all types of, add molecules to it. And by adding the molecules to it, they actually, are able to create all these different chemicals, which are found in plastics and a whole host of products we use on an everyday basis. But essentially, that's how we got all these chemicals. And as the Rockefellers were the early founders of the oil industry, and they're also the financiers of the American eugenics movement. And one of the things that they, as part of eugenics, a great way to achieve population control and eugenics is through homosexuality. So what better way to do that covertly than to create chemicals which feminize men and masculinize women, and then finance organizations such as Planned Parenthood, which recommend this, which recommend adding, recommend adding anti-fertility agents within the water, and recommend pushing and encouraging homosexuality to decrease the world's population. So that's the link between these chemicals and the oil industry. And to this day, ExxonMobil, BP, they make billions of dollars selling benzene to some of these chemical manufacturers who then turn that benzene into bisphenol A, turn it into phthalates, etc. And that's one of the reasons why these chemicals haven't been banned, because the oil industry, they control both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And when there is any type of ban that's recommended, they usually will have the chemicals removed from baby products. But by the time the baby gets without the womb or gets out of the womb, they've already been chemically altered essentially. Even before they get out the womb.
All right. And would you like to discuss top manufacturers of endocrine disrupting chemicals?
Yeah, some of the top manufacturers are BASF, Dow Chemical, BASF, Dow Chemical, Bayer, which is a pharmaceutical company. So that's another interesting tidbit. They make aspirin. So BASF, Bayer, Monsanto is another one. Syngenta, which is another spinoff of a pharmaceutical company. So those are the top manufacturers of the chemicals. Now BASF and Bayer, they're derived, or they were components of IG Farben, who were some of the primary financiers of the Hitler regime. Now, of course, Hitler got all his ideas on eugenics from American eugenicists such as the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, et cetera. They actually financed some of the schools that some of Hitler's top eugenic scientists went to. I forget the name of the exact school now; it'll come to me later. But they were IG Farben, and they were broken up after World War II, and essentially they parented off into like four different companies. One which makes vaccines, particularly flu vaccines. Another one which makes chemicals, these chemical warfare agents, Bayer and BASF. So those companies are linked to IG Farben, and IG Farben at one point was the world's largest corporation, and they were of course supported by Wall Street, supported by Henry Ford, supported by a lot of American businesses, and of course they created that one concentration camp in which they ran all types of human experiments. They actually encouraged the Hitler regime to build this type of concentration camp in order so they can conduct all types of experiments on some of the Jews who lived there at the time. These companies.
We should also point out, though, I don't want to make this an anti-Germanic show. We should also make the point that the Bolshevik Jews also killed over 60 million white Russians. So at least that way we're having a balanced discussion about World War II,
I understand. Fair enough. So these companies, who were involved and supported the Hitler regime, now they kind of are involved here in America and support the fascism, particularly Monsanto, which is the mergers of the state and big business. They support the fascism here in America. So that's the link between those some of those companies.
All right. So what is the hidden story of DES and the first exposed endocrine disrupting chemical similar to soy and BPA? And would you like to go into that and the connection to health problems and homosexuality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so DES, or it's known as diethyl estrogen, that's some type of, scientific name. I can't think of the exact pronunciation of it. But DES was, of course, it was FDA approved. It was FDA approved to prevent miscarriages. So it was a drug. It was actually an estrogen, because again, most of these chemicals they mimic estrogen. So it was given to women to prevent miscarriages. And it was put on the market, I think, from the 1940s to 1970s. And it was given to women to prevent miscarriages, and that was the premise of this particular drug. Now, what happened was is that it was found out later on, once the drug was taken off the market, which is typical of pharmaceutical drugs, which are approved by the FDA. Once it was taken off the market, it was that's when it was realized that it was causing all these health problems. So what happened was is that women who took DES, they developed breast cancer, and their children who were developing within the womb developed breast cancer, even if they didn't take DES. So you had the mother who developed breast cancer, the baby who developed breast cancer, and it was discovered that DES actually causes changes in the way the DNA of future generation expresses through a process known as epigenetics, which essentially governs how your genes express themselves. It's not necessarily changing your genes, but you can change the way genes express themselves to essentially make people sick, make people infertile, make people develop diabetes, anxiety disorders, a whole host of health problems. And that's what DES did. It changed how the DNA expressed, and these changes were passed along to future generations. So for example, the mother developed breast cancer. The daughter, who was developing within the womb, developed breast cancer. The third generation after the mother, or the third generation, the great granddaughter, had infertility problems, and generation after that will have infertility problems as well. And again, these subsequent generations after the mother were not exposed directly to DES, but through the epigenetic changes that occurred, they developed these same health problems where they're known as DES daughters, DES granddaughters, and DES great granddaughters. And more research that I have done shows that these epigenetic changes are can be done into infinity. They cause changes forever. Now, the link between gender identity and homosexuality was that DES was an estrogen and actually masculinized the brain within, when the child was developing within the womb. So there are numerous studies which showed that DES, caused, people to identify, female women to identify to identify as men and to increase lesbianism. That was one of the studies that was shown in the early 1980s, was how DES actually, it was linked to lesbianism, and that's because the estrogen masculinized the brain. So then within the womb, so then the female fetus came out and was attracted to women. So that was another interesting tidbit about DES, was that it actually, animal studies showed that animals, women who are exposed to female mice who were exposed to DES were actually less nurturing and were less interested in having kids. So this was a study done on the mothers now, who basically were given small doses of DES. When they had babies, they didn't want to breastfeed them. And even worse, they weren't even interested in having babies. So, you look at the modern day Western woman who takes all these synthetic estrogens and birth control and bisphenol A and soy. That's probably the reason why more and more women have, of course, they're lesbians now, but they have no interest in having kids.
Right. All right. So, what about Agent Orange and the hidden genocide on Vietnam and U.S. veterans?
Yeah, Agent Orange was comprised of 2,4-D, which is a chemical they're going to be using now, to spray on corn because of FDA approval. It's actually a GMO resistant 2,4-D corn, which is approved by the USDA, I believe, recently. It was 2,4-D and another chemical, but it was contaminated with dioxin. And the U.S. government, their reason for spraying Agent Orange during the Vietnam War was essentially to commit genocide. They wanted to starve the Vietnamese people. Had nothing to do with defoliating the region. They wanted to kill their crops, And one of the best ways to do that is just to spray herbicides all throughout the country. So imagine, you're just, sitting out in your deck, drinking a cold, whatever you're doing. I said drinking a cold one. You're sitting out on your deck, and all of a sudden, just an airplane just comes over the sky and just spraying a mist, almost like how they do with chemtrails, but it's spraying a mist now, and that mist like literally like descends on you, and it destroys everything that you've been growing for years, etc. So essentially, that's what happened in Vietnam. It killed close to about almost 400,000 people. And it's still, the people in Vietnam are still dealing with the effects because the chemical, it's the chemical was made to persist in the environment for decades and decades to come. But the U.S. government, they wanted to spray this chemical again to cause, starvation, essentially, to, impose a similar thing that the Israelis are currently doing with the Palestinians, where they're trying to just starve them out, essentially, to kill them off. That's exactly what the U.S. government did. And at the time, they told veterans that the chemical was safe, and hey, you can spray it on yourself. So tons of veterans were spraying this stuff all throughout the country, just spraying on crops, spraying in the water, spraying it everywhere. And they were being exposed to the most toxic chemical ever invented, which is dioxin. So the veterans come back and they're all sick and have lymphoma and leukemia and all these different diseases. And the U.S. government just basically says, well, wasn't our problem. We didn't, the chemical was safe. So, when they knew the chemical was dangerous, and this chemical was actually invented by Monsanto and by Dow Chemical, who are some of the major manufacturers of some of these endocrine disruptors. So that, is how, dangerous these chemicals can be. And the effects are still long lasting. There are still deformed babies, babies being born with like one eye, in Vietnam, like no hands, etc., as a result of these really toxic chemicals.
All right, let's get into the Rockefellers. Excuse me. Let's get into the Rockefellers, Planned Parenthood, homosexuality causing petrochemicals, and the eugenics movement. That's a mouthful.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the Rockefellers, they are, the oil men, the monopoly men, if you will. And they were eugenicists. So they used their money through their tax-free foundations to finance all types of eugenics movements all throughout the world. They financed the Hitler, the stuff that went on in Nazi Germany, financed all types of eugenics operations. So one of the major organizations that they financed was Planned Parenthood, who was founded by Margaret Sanger, who was, a huge proponent of eugenics, thought eugenics would save the world. And again, as I mentioned, 1970s, Planned Parenthood put out a document stating that they wished to, encourage homosexuality in order to decrease population. And since the Rockefellers were oil men, they're basically doing all this drilling for oil and have all these different oil companies, which, they're the byproducts of their oil drilling was used to make some of these homosexuality chemicals, such as bisphenol A and et cetera. That's essentially how, they were able to carry out their eugenics operation. One of the ways, there's multiple ways they can carry it out, abortion being one, but also chemicals being another. Chemicals which sterilize people and which cause people to be born gay, essentially. And Planned Parenthood, they're also one of the largest distributors of birth control. And most of the water supply today is filled with birth control pills. That's why they have hermaphrodite fish swimming within the Potomac River. Birth control is, when women and boys are exposed to birth control within the womb, that will also cause them to be gay as well. And to lower
the insanity of all of this is, they think they're going to target just humans, but they target the fish. The fish get eaten by birds and other mammals, and it just goes right up through the whole food chain. I mean, it's insanity and stupidity at its finest.
Absolutely. Because their whole entire species of fish and aquatic life, which are in a state of collapse as a result of being exposed to all these different chemicals. And I think there was one study that was done which showed that there was a lake in Canada, and they interjected very small doses of what is basically the birth control pill within that lake. Within almost like 5 years, all the men were gone, all the male fish were gone, and the fish species almost went extinct. So that's kind of similar to what's going on today. A lot of men being feminized, and there's less men being born. So that's causing a lot more. That could cause that's causing a lot less humans to be born as well in many different countries. So that's essentially what's happening in animal world's happening to humans as well.
Instead of uplifting everyone, they create essentially a cancer. Then you try and kill off the cancer and then protect the host right at the last second and turn things around right before you destroy everything. I mean, it's just it's an insane approach to solving the issue rather than uplifting people. It's like Sir Thomas More quote: "For if you the rulers suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for those first crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else can be concluded from this but that you first make thieves and outlaws and then punish them?" And so, rather, these elitists and these people want to maintain their positions of power, and so uplifting the masses isn't a true answer. You have to pretend that everybody's dumb, and you spend billions of dollars dumbing them down, mind controlling them, fooling them, putting them through compulsory education, polluting the environment, blaming them for the whole thing that you've created and done, and then and trying to get them to believe it rather than a direct approach, which would be solutions oriented. So, what about the Koch brothers and Tea Party movement and the manufacturing of BPA?
Well, I wanted to include them because when I was doing research into bisphenol A, there's a lot of talk about the Koch brothers today. But I was like, they're kind of right wing, so-called right wing people. But they're, manufacturing and making, millions of dollars off of homosexuality chemical. Meanwhile, while they are, I know that the original Tea Party movement with Ron Paul was totally different than the one that's around today. But they financed this movement. And of course, the Tea Party movement is against homosexuality and gay marriage. But one of the major financiers is a billionaire who's causing, contributing to homosexuality in society by manufacturing bisphenol A. And they also finance and give money to Susan Komen, to deny that bisphenol A even causes breast cancer or is even like a health problem whatsoever for women. So I wanted to, I just thought that was interesting. I'm like, wow, but they're oil men. The Koch brothers are essentially involved in oil drilling, just like the Rockefellers. And they use their money to finance a lot of different right-wing causes, just like the Rockefellers used it to finance a lot of so-called left-wing causes. But a lot of people say left-wing, right-wing, same bird.
Well, there you go. So, how do endocrine disrupting chemicals? How are they used for population control? And we've kind of covered that already, but round it up, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the major thing is they do is besides, the homosexuality aspect, they actually cause multi-generational infertility. So when men are exposed to these chemicals, number one, they can't. It actually causes their sperm to be unable to produce male babies. So that's one of the kind of the first things. Actually, lowest population of men, because the gender of the baby is determined by the sperm. So if that sperm has been altered by these chemicals, then that man can't produce a male child. But it causes multi-generational infertility. So for men, it makes their sperm count lower. And those effects go on to future generations. Not only that, but it destroys their Sertoli cells, which are the cells which are necessary to produce testosterone. And these effects are multi-generational. Now, for women, it causes multi-generational infertility as well, primarily through the changes that occur as a result of epigenetics. And it does this by actually lowering the amount of eggs that a woman can produce, and causing polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is close to about 8% of women have in this country. Essentially, insulin resistance of the ovaries, but bisphenol A in particular causes insulin resistance, throughout the body. It is linked to type 2 diabetes. But not only that, it actually causes polycystic ovarian syndrome, and and it causes this by by the ovaries being exposed to this chemical within the womb, and these effects are then passed along to future generations. So again, I mean, women, who are exposed to bisphenol A, they have less eggs. I'm just mentioning bisphenol A as one example of the chemical. And men who are exposed to it, they have testicular cancer. Their penises are smaller, and actually shortens the distance between the anus and the testicles. It's known as the anogenital distance, and the shorter distance actually is linked to infertility, and also the shorter distance is linked with the smaller penis as well. And again, these changes, particularly the infertility changes, are passed along to subsequent generations via epigenetics. So, along with the homosexuality part, it just sterilizes people. And of course, it kills people as well. But the infertility and homosexuality part are the major factors which, make these chemicals essentially population control chemicals.
And how do these chemicals cause brain disorders like autism and mental retardation?
Yeah, well, bisphenol A in particular, it actually, since it changes, the way the genes express, it actually makes your genes disease. So, a lot of these geneticists who are really, oftentimes eugenicists, they changed, instead of calling themselves eugenicists, they call themselves geneticists to kind of fool people. They oftentimes talk about how all these different diseases are genetic disorders. But they fail to mention that, they are genetic disorders, but what's causing, people's genes to be messed up in the first place. And it's some of these toxic chemicals. In particular, bisphenol A actually, it harms the genes, and makes the genes disease. So then the child actually develops mental retardation. This was a study that was done several years ago that I found. Not only that, but you have an increase within autism. And this increase in autism is primarily found within boys. And it is, and essentially, as I mentioned before, bisphenol A actually blocks testosterone from getting to the brain, and the brain from undergoing a full masculinization. And it's thought that these chemicals, they essentially target men's brains in particular, through the fact that so many boys today have autism, ADHD. It targets their brains, and it prevents the brains from developing properly. And one of the reasons why it does this is because it blocks testosterone, and testosterone is necessary for healthy brain development. So when that testosterone is blocked, then that baby boy or developing male fetus, essentially will have, their brain will not be developed. It'll be essentially a diseased brain. It will not be properly developed. And then later on in life, particularly if they get vaccines and, are drinking or eating wheat and consuming sugar, they would develop autism as a result. So it kind of predisposes the brain even before the baby boy gets out the womb to these particular conditions. And it does this through blocking the testosterone from getting to the brain and make sure that the brain develops properly. Because human beings, essentially, they develop within the womb. So if things are being blocked, if certain hormones are being blocked, because as I mentioned, all these chemicals, they mimic certain important hormones, then, human beings cannot develop properly. And the documentary Disrupting Humanity discusses this. These endocrine disruptors literally disrupt humanity. They prevent us from developing properly. So that's why it causes some of these some of these mental conditions.
All right, and this is all Aldous Huxley's dream. Aldous Huxley was the psychopath's psychopath, and he's really the one who developed a lot of this stuff. The entire Huxley family, all the way to Sir Thomas Henry Huxley, who worked with Darwin. He was Darwin's propaganda manager, all the way to the present with Francis Huxley, etc. The entire family tree is involved in putting all of this crap onto humanity. They develop various institutes like the Esalen Institute, etc., to promote veganism and these things into society and couple it with, psychedelic religious Buddhism, whatever, and, convoluted, etc. But in Brave New World Revisited, on the first paragraph of Chapter 2, Huxley says, "In the brave new world of my fantasy, eugenics and dysgenics were practiced systematically in one set of bottles, biologically superior ova, fertilized by biologically superior sperm, were given the best possible prenatal treatment and were finally decanted as betas, alphas, and even alpha pluses. In another, much more numerous set of bottles, biologically inferior ova fertilized by biologically inferior sperm were subjected to the Bokanovsky process, 96 identical twins out of one single egg, and were treated prenatally with alcohol and other protein poisons. The creatures finally decanted were almost subhuman, but they were capable of performing unskilled work and, when properly conditioned, detention by free and frequent access to the opposite sex, constantly distracted by gratuitous entertainment, and reinforced in their good behavior patterns by daily doses of soma, could be counted on to give no trouble to their superiors. Aldous Huxley.
Absolutely. That's it right there. I'm familiar with his work and his discussion on particularly the hormones and how I think men will be exposed to sex hormones and alter their behavior and etc. Yeah, I mean, so that's the brave new world we live in these days. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're living in Aldous Huxley's psychopathic dream. I mean, the only person that you can think of to compare to Huxley and his psychopathology would be somebody like Trotsky, who is, behind a large portion of the murders in Russia. About 40 million of the murders were Trotsky's. All right, so what are the dangers of bisphenol A, phthalates, atrazine, parabens, and how do we avoid them?
Yeah, so bisphenol A, as I mentioned, we discussed earlier, it's primarily composed of a benzene molecule. It's really easy to avoid. Number one, if you avoid all plastics, and this also includes BPA-free plastics, because there's a lot of media attention now to bisphenol A and some of these chemicals. So what companies are doing, they're being slick, is that they'll say, okay, we'll make BPA free stuff. We'll make BPA free bottles, BPA free this, BPA free that. There was a gentleman, Dr. Wow, popular so-called naturopath. Some of his BPA free products were found to contain some of these same estrogen mimics. So it is important to avoid all
You're
plastics.
talking about Dr. Andrew Weil.
Yes, he sells.
That's really interesting because I have linked him to other scandals as well, and I actually used to know that guy many years ago. But that you would say that isn't that much of a surprise to me.
Oh no, yes, I mean he supports soy. He says people should take herbs along with chemotherapy. It's just, I mean, come on. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely a fraudster. So yeah, I mean, but BPA-free plastics are even oftentimes just as toxic as regular plastics. So you definitely want to avoid all plastics, including those 5-gallon water jugs, which are usually found in most bottled water companies. They use. So avoid all plastics, avoid all grocery receipts. Grocery receipts are a huge source of bisphenol A, because they add it in the ink and within the thermal paper that they use to print out the receipts. So whenever I go to the grocery store, I don't ever get receipts. And there was another study which came out recently which stated that using hand sanitizers, which contain a toxic chemical triscalosin, and lotions, which can usually contain parabens and phthalates, because most lotions are usually fragrance, actually increases the absorption of bisphenol A by 100 times. So whenever you're being exposed to bisphenol A via grocery receipts, then it's going directly into your bloodstream. Whereas if you digest it, by eating canned foods, for example, then a lot of it gets broken down, particularly if you have a healthy amount of probiotics within your system, which is, I want to mention one way that you can minimize your exposure to bisphenol A is consume a lot of fermented foods. But bisphenol A, you avoid it in the grocery receipts. It's found in canned foods. It's found in plastics, so avoid all plastics. Avoid all plastic wraps. It also is found in paper money as well, but that's really, I mean, unless you want to wear gloves, but it is found in paper money that the Federal Reserve prints out. So it's found in that good old Federal Reserve paper. So it is found in paper money. But those are the major sources of it. So if you're avoiding plastics, you're avoiding canned foods, and you're avoiding, typically 5-gallon water jugs, paper receipts, then you're essentially avoiding bisphenol A. Now, phthalates is another, or yeah, phthalates, yeah, it's another chemical, which again is actually an anti-testosterone chemical. This chemical is also found primarily within plastics as well, but it's also found within fragrance. So whenever men, they're spraying on all this Axe body spray, because the subliminal sex ad told them they're going to get more women, by spraying on Axe within their body, all the crap. That contains phthalates. So you're not going to get more women because you're not going to be able to get an erection as a result of spraying on all the artificial fragrances. So it's primarily found within fragrance products. So most of your laundry detergents, scented candles, anything which has a scent to it is more than likely going to contain phthalates. So the best way to avoid phthalates is to avoid all fragrance products. Avoid all fragrances.
Make
And
sure
any
that
product,
they're essential oils rather than fragrances.
yes. Now, I will say essential oils, in particular lavender and tea tree, also mimic estrogen as well. So you want to
Wow.
be careful
Okay.
about those. Yeah, you want to be careful about those two. And I think lavender and tea tree are actually found to cause boys to develop boobs.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so you just want to be careful because I mean a lot of people oh yeah tea tree oil and lavender spraying putting all over their body. It's like you're essentially just dousing yourself with estrogen essentially. It's a plant estrogen, but it's just like soy. It's still
Right.
estrogen. So yeah, you definitely, just avoid those two essential oils. But any type of fragrance product is, essentially the best way to avoid phthalates. It's also found within soft plastic, so like PVC plastic that you might use. Most people when they buy vinyl curtains or vinyl houseware or vinyl shower curtains, they put down vinyl flooring. They use vinyl in their vaginas because most of the sex toys, the dildos, are made through PVC plastic. So that PVC plastic that's found within the sex toy contains phthalates. And of course, phthalates are linked to having a smaller penis. So a lot of women today, they're using chemicals which will make their baby boys' penises smaller. But of course, they don't know that as a result of the whole sex industry and the hidden chemicals that their products contain. But any type of PVC products, so PVC bags, they use a lot of those PVC products, particularly on children. So like a lot of those cheap Disney bags that they sell to kids, particularly the girls and the boys, those are made with PVC. So any type of PVC product, and PVC plastic wrap, which you might find like within cheese or within meat, that will contain the really soft, like type of plastic that you can wrap stuff around. That contains phthalates as well. So if you avoid those products, then you should be good on phthalates. As far as parabens are actually found within food, but they're also always spelled out, so they're not like hidden. So bisphenol A is hidden, phthalates are hidden, but parabens, when they're labeled on cosmetics and they're labeled within food, you can just read the ingredients and see parabens, polyparaben or methylparaben. Those all mimic estrogen, and it has been found that close to 99% of women who have breast cancer have parabens within their breast tissue. So it is a huge cause of breast cancer. Now, the only time that parabens are not labeled is again within sex products. So, like a lot of lubricants that people use, like when using lubricated condoms or what have you, it's not going to say it contains parabens, but usually that lubricant does contain parabens. And the condom within itself contains non-oxyl 9, which breaks down as into your body as an estrogen. And non-oxyl 9 is basically spermicide. So anytime you use spermicidal products or products with sex lubricants, then those usually will contain non-oxyl 9 and parabens. But parabens are usually really easy to avoid because they're spelled out. So they're really easy to avoid. Now, atrazine, there's a guy by the name of Dr. Tyrone Hayes who's done fascinating research on atrazine, talking about how it actually makes male frogs assume the feminine mating position. So like he's had like studies where he's shown like two male frogs, mating with each other, because the male frog's brain was feminized. So it assumes like the feminine mating position. He's done a lot of fascinating work on atrazine. Atrazine is primarily used on corn. And whenever you consume a lot of meat, because most meat in this country is corn fed, or you consume any type of corn product, high fructose corn syrup, etc., you are more than likely going to consume atrazine. Not only that, but atrazine, since it's sprayed on corn, it actually leaks out into the Mississippi River because most of the corn in this country is grown, around kind of the Mississippi Delta region, Iowa, and Nebraska, essentially in areas where the tributaries go into the Mississippi River. So atrazine is close because of that, because it's sprayed within corn, and we develop so much of our land towards corn. Atrazine, according to the USDA study, is found in close to about 94% of water, drinking water these days, including well water, and it's not filtered out. Because when the government filters your water, only thing they filter out is chlorine. Well, no, they don't filter out anything. They just filter out raw sewage. They put the fluoride in there. They put the chlorine in there. Birth control pills are within there. Lead, they put all types. There's all types of stuff within drinking water these days, and that includes bottled water as well because that's found within plastics. So atrazine is primarily found within water, primarily due to contamination from all the that fact that's used. It's like the most popular pesticide after Roundup. So just like Roundup is found in a lot of our water supply these days, atrazine is found in water supply as well. That's why it's best to avoid virtually all corn products, particularly if they're not organic. But atrazine, it is linked to homosexual behavior in frogs. It does cause all types of testicular cancer, breast cancer, and it is made by a company named Syngenta, which is a spinoff of a pharmaceutical company known as Novartis and AstraZeneca. So essentially, big pharma is producing more clients, more patients who will need their drugs later on in life by developing atrazine. But if you avoid all corn products, then you should be good on atrazine.
All right. What about chemicals found in plastics? How are they making women more masculine?
Well, they're doing this, as I mentioned, primarily bisphenol A. It causes, of course, it masculinizes the brain, so it causes
Okay.
lesbianism. But not only that, it causes PCOS. And when a woman has PCOS, then the ovaries begin to produce more testosterone. So that's why a lot of women today they have unwanted facial hair as a result of as a result of being exposed to bisphenol A, which is found within plastics. It actually stimulates the ovaries to produce large amounts of testosterone, which causes women to develop unwanted facial hair. So, a lot of women, today, as a result of being exposed to bisphenol A, they actually, it actually mentioned that in Brave New World too, how, the women would have like, I think, facial hair, et cetera, I believe. And that's as a result of bisphenol A because bisphenol A stimulates ovaries to produce testosterone.
And how does birth control cause multi-generational breast cancer?
Yeah, birth control, it is artificial estrogen. And there was a recent study which came out which documented how, again, through the same epigenetic changes that I was discussing earlier, birth control actually causes, when a woman takes birth control, she increases her risk of developing breast cancer. But not only that, future generations also increase their risk of developing breast cancer as well through the epigenetic changes. And of course, if sometimes women get pregnant when they're on birth control and they don't know it. So all that estrogen, they're actually, they're exposing their developing female fetus to. So it will increase their risk of developing breast cancer. But it does this by changing the way the genes express themselves. And by doing this in a similar way that DES did, then you actually can cause multi-generational health problems because these epigenetic changes will be passed along to future generations.
And how is birth control created for population control? I mean, this one should be a given for most people, but go into it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, birth control is basically it's a product of Margaret Sanger, and I believe another scientist who actually worked at one of those eugenics Nazi scientific academies that was financed by the Rockefellers and the Carnegie. But so yeah, it was her idea. And when they created birth control, they actually went to Puerto Rico because they considered Puerto Ricans to be degenerate. So they went to Puerto Rico and they tested the drug out, and it killed 8 of the women This is kind of like a modern day Tuskegee experiment type deal. It killed 8 of the Puerto Rican women, and it was as a result of testing the birth control, just killed them because birth control, causes blood clots. But essentially, birth control, it, not only does it kill women, but actually sterilizes them as well. Particularly, some of these, the regular birth control pill can cause infertility. It causes infertility, and you have Depo-Provera, which actually sterilizes people. The Israeli government uses Depo-Provera on Ethiopian, primarily black, essentially non Jewish people or non-white Jewish people in Israel to sterilize them. That came out a while ago. How the Israeli government was giving Ethiopian Jews Depo-Provera to decrease their population, etc. But birth control essentially always has been about population control. Birth control again is an artificial hormone, so it will cause infertility in men. It will cause infertility in women. It will cause homosexuality. And many of the birth control pills that are out now they just permanently sterilize you. Like Depo-Provera just permanently sterilizes you. Just as soon as you get a few shots, you're pretty much done essentially. So that's something that Bill Gates is using to sterilize women in the third world right now. He's spending billions of dollars on that. Um, you know, so that's why there's a whole moral debate. Oh, we should give women birth control. Has nothing to do with helping women out. Has to do with sterilizing them essentially.
Right.
So that's
All right.
what birth.
How are chemicals making men fat, lazy, and wimpy?
Yeah, so the chemicals that I mentioned, they cause men. They are also obesity causing chemicals, and this is primarily due to the fact that they mimic estrogen. And when it's known that when a person is exposed to lots of estrogen, primarily when they're pregnant, they gain weight. It's not because not because of a lack of diet and exercise, it's because their hormones. In particular, estrogen actually stimulates the release of insulin, insulin being your body's fat storing and promoting hormone. So when you're exposed to some of these chemicals, which are also known as obesogens within the womb, you actually have more fat cells within your body. So you're kind of, again, predisposed to being fat, which is something that we always, we used to mention within the media. Oh, obesity is genetic. Well, yeah, okay, it's genetic, but what's causing people's genes to change? And it is these toxic chemicals people are being exposed to. So these obesogens, they cause people to have more fat cells. The estrogen itself actually actually cause people to gain weight later on in life when they're adults because is a fat storing hormone. And not only that, but when you're exposed to these chemicals within the womb, it causes huge amounts of anxiety disorders, which are on the increase, in particular within boys. So when you're anxious all the time, then you don't want to you're gonna avoid conflict essentially. You're gonna let people run over you because of your anxiety. It's something I've dealt with myself. You're not going to defend yourself or fight back because you're scared essentially, and that's what these chemicals cause. They cause anxiety disorders within the essentially by being exposed to them within the womb, and even furthermore, by causing insulin resistance, they actually make people lazy, which is something that Dr. Robert Lustig talked about before in one of his lectures on insulin. When people have high insulin levels, they don't want to work out and they eat because the hormone is causing a biochemical feedback, which is essentially causing them to engage in gluttony and sloth. It's not that gluttony and sloth causes obesity, it's that when your insulin levels are high, you naturally become a glutton and a sloth. And the chemicals also cause insulin resistance as well.
It's
So
it basically breaks down into the whole glycolysis versus ketosis issue, and people who are on a low fat, low protein, low cholesterol diet, they're going to be running in glycolysis, and it's fine for fight or flight, but basically it's if you're in that state, you're telling the body that you're in a famine. And
exactly.
and this is also what causes the body to shut off reproduction and all of this stuff. Whereas when you're in ketosis, you're telling the body that there's plenty of food around, you have plenty of fat in your diet and protein, etc. And therefore, the brain gets clearer, you become more active, and the body says, hey, it's time to reproduce.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's why, and also the chemicals lower testosterone. And when you have low levels of testosterone, then, you just want to sit on your butt and watch football all day. You don't really want to do much, essentially, because, testosterone is a hormone which does make people more sexually active. And it also makes people more active in general. So that's another reason why.
All right, so how are estrogenic chemicals destroying women and causing multi generational health problems?
Well, the multi-generational health problems are primarily caused through the epigenetics, particularly the PCOS, the breast cancer, and the infertility. Those are primarily caused through epigenetics. But women, the women are really just being, they're getting massacred these days by these chemicals. The chemicals cause breast cancer. They cause early puberty. They cause, which is, one of the reasons why pedophilia is, on the increase these days, or kind of increasing. They cause early puberty, they cause breast cancer, they cause ovarian cancer, fibroids, endometriosis. They cause, of course, obesity. They cause polycystic ovarian syndrome, type 2 diabetes. So just about every single disease that has been increasing in women within the past 100 years, even heart disease, is linked to these being exposed to these chemicals, and oftentimes being exposed to them within the womb. So breast cancer, was rare, back in the early 1940s. Now, 1 in 8 women get breast cancer as a result of being exposed to all these different chemicals, including soy, which mimics estrogen. So that's why, because most of these diseases, fibroids, endometriosis, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, etc., they're all estrogen dependent diseases, meaning that, if you are exposed to too much estrogen, natural, unnatural, then you will increase your risk factor of developing those diseases. Not only that, as I mentioned before, when you're exposed to these chemicals from the womb, the epigenetic changes not only cause you, to basically, your genes essentially become diseased and you develop these diseases later on in life. Not only that, but you pass along those epigenetic changes to future generations. So that's why, these chemicals, another interesting thing I found was that they actually prevent the women from breastfeeding. So being exposed to these chemicals within the womb actually are causing women to be unable to breastfeed, which makes them get their children on the infant formula. So, I mean, it's like a vicious cycle.
And so then it also makes them less interested in nurturing and having kids as well, obviously, right?
Absolutely, because bisphenol A, which mimics DES, and soy, which they're all molecularly, whatever how you say it, molecularly
Molecularly.
similar. Yes, thank you. They're all similar essentially,
All
chemically
right.
similar.
So, how can women protect themselves from these chemicals?
Well, the most important thing that they can do, as far as the cancer aspect, is to take, of course, have a healthy diet, a low carb, ideally, people call paleo diet. Have a low carb diet because carbs also increase your risk of developing many of these diseases. But it also is important to take adequate amounts of vitamin D. So vitamin D helps to protect you against these chemicals. Taking adequate amounts of probiotics helps to protect you against these chemicals. Supplements like chlorella, spirulina, which they all contain components which help to detox these chemicals from your body. It's also important to stay away from soy and from fluoride, because many of these chemicals, they harm your thyroid gland, which increases your risk of developing many different diseases. So you want to make sure that your thyroid is properly nourished, which again, primarily is, your thyroid, it runs healthy when you're consuming like a lot of fats, healthy fats like butter, etc., and meats. So it is important to, again, take vitamin D, avoid, of course, avoid all those chemicals as I mentioned, the bisphenol A, the phthalates, avoid some of the cosmetics which contain heavy metals, lipstick which contains lead. Cosmetics today are just extremely toxic. So, it's really best to use kind of like natural makeups or just not wear a lot of makeup at all. Because even some of the natural makeups contain certain questionable ingredients. But the best thing to do is, to have a healthy diet, you minimize your exposure to those chemicals, and take adequate amounts of vitamin D, which protects your body against a lot of different cancers, protects your body against heart disease, and also, helps to improve your fertility, which again, a lot of women struggle with fertility these days as a result of being exposed to those chemicals. Um, So
All
that's
right.
how you can protect himself.
All right. Would you do you, we covered this some, but do you want to cover multi-generational health problems through epigenetics in more depth?
Oh yeah, well, I mean that's basically kind of what I mentioned before. The chemicals they change the way the DNA expresses itself, and those changes are just
Right.
passed along to future generations.
All right. What products and chemicals cause women to develop fibrosis, endometriosis, breast cancer, early puberty, PCOS, and uterine cancer?
So the primary products which cause that, as I mentioned before, the cosmetics. Also, you have tampons, which are usually bleached and thereby contain dioxin. And not only that, but a lot of the cotton pads that women use also contain a lot of pesticides because cotton is the most pesticided crop on the planet, and most of the cotton these days is also genetically modified. So the tampons they cause problems. A lot of the cotton pads cause problems. Nail polish contains phthalates because the nail polish actually they use phthalates to make the nail polish adhere to your nails. So nail polish causes those problems. The lipstick causes the problems. As I mentioned, the cosmetics, a lot of the hair care products, the Pantene Pro V and all these other products that they use, which contain fragrance, contains phthalates, and also you have a lot of the lotions that women use on a consistent basis, particularly the fragrance lotions, which oftentimes contain the phthalates and the parabens, and oftentimes made with soybean oil, so you're getting genetically modified soy. So for most women, a lot of their products which they put on their bodies are the ones they're doing put on or in their bodies are the ones that are doing the most harm. Not only that, but you have products like NuvaRing. NuvaRing is actually, you're actually putting estrogen right within your vagina, and that estrogen actually just goes straight into your bloodstream, and that's why like 4,000 women have like died as a result of just taking NuvaRing. And that's how toxic it is because it causes blood clots. So that's another product that women use on a consistent basis that's harming them. But most of the product that women use on their bodies and their hair, on their nails, those are the products which are causing them the most harm. The tampons, as I mentioned, the dildos, the spermicides, the sex lubricants. So it's really best to use a lot of all natural products. Use olive oil on your skin, use coconut oil on your skin. Um, you know, avoid some of the hand sanitizers which contain triskellosin, which is a really toxic endocrine disrupting chemical as well. Avoid, if you're going to use tampons, which I don't recommend, it's probably better to use like a menstrual cloth or a diva cup or organic cotton pads. You want to use organic pads so they're not and unbleached. So those are the main products that women, the cosmetics and some stuff they put on their hair and their skin. One major ones they want to avoid. So it's best to then use more natural products, but just make sure again doesn't contain lavender or tea tree. Those are the two main essential oils that you want to look out for and avoid.
And how are chemicals making men less interested in sex and more interested in porn?
Yeah, so the chemicals they actually destroy a part of the brain. I think it's in the nucleus it's some part of the brain which governs your motivation. So essentially, this was documented, I think, in a recent article in Breitbart.com, about men checking out of society. And I'm not surprised about this because essentially these chemicals not only are they destroying men's ability to produce testosterone, which makes them, not as interested in sex, but it also destroys the part of the brain which governs motivation, which is the same thing that video games also target as well. That's why you have all these men today just they're kind of like zombies. They just play games all day. They don't want to, get out and interact with women and date real women. They just want to play games. So the chemicals actually do destroy that part of the brain within the womb. So that's the reason why a lot of guys these days, and not only that, it also causes ADHD, which men who have ADHD can tend to engage in more addictive behaviors. It's just not a disease per se, not something you require Ritalin. You definitely don't require Ritalin, but you're more likely to engage in addictive behaviors. And they intentionally make pornography very addictive. So the fact that it actually harms and rewires the brain, lowers testosterone levels, increases insulin levels, which makes people more lazy, makes them want to sit on the couch and not get out and be active. That's the reason why it actually lowers sexual interest. And another thing that does that is aspirin. It was found within a study that aspirin, particularly when women take it when they're having a developing male fetus, it actually causes the male offspring. This was done in animal studies. It caused the male offspring to have lower interest in sex. So because essentially the way aspirin affects testosterone levels, essentially, because aspirin is another, it's a drug made by Bayer, essentially. It was first invented by Bayer. So that's the primary reason why men today, because they just the part of the brain which warrants motivation, has been destroyed by bisphenol A and by phthalates and all these other anti-testosterone chemicals. Because most of these chemicals, they are anti-testosterone. They mimic estrogen, so yeah, they do harm to women, but they do far more harm to men because they just block testosterone. They don't block estrogen, but these chemicals, they do block testosterone.
And how are chemicals making kids dumber and more violent?
Yeah, well, essentially by harming the development of the brain, it actually lowers IQ. So there's a recent study which came out which documented how phthalates actually, it's linked to lower IQ scores, and it does this primarily through disrupting brain development. Because if the brain isn't getting adequate amounts of thyroid hormones, important sex hormones like testosterone, and other hormones which are released during pregnancy and which help the human being develop properly, then it's going to make that human being more dumber. Not only that, but it's going to cause violence again by rewiring the brain, because when there's not adequate amounts of hormones, then the brain does not develop properly. And as I mentioned, ADHD can also, oftentimes kids who have ADHD can be prone to aggression as well. And the chemicals cause that. Now, of course, a lot of that aggression is probably caused by psychiatric drugs. But, the fact that, ADHD is linked with aggression, I guess besides the drugs, is another way that the chemicals, by disrupting the way the brain develops early on within the womb, can cause kids to be more prone to antisocial behaviors.
And how are chemicals deliberately targeting men and the common male products which contain these chemicals?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, most of the chemicals, they are anti-testosterone chemicals. So I mentioned before that they actually feminize men's sperm to make them unable to have a male child. So that's the first thing it does. Feminizes the sperm. Second thing it does is that it actually blocks testosterone. So when you block testosterone, you can actually cause a male baby to be aborted. So a lot of women today, in particular, miscarriages on increase in America. In particular, miscarriages of male babies, and this is essentially due to the fact that it's more men essentially at least within the womb are the weaker sex. In that we're all essentially females when we're first developing within the womb, and then the testosterone kicks in, and then that kind of turns us into a male, if you will. So that testosterone is not available, then it's going to be extremely difficult for that male baby to come to full term and to come out of the womb. So these chemicals, they actually cause male babies in particular to be aborted. So that's why the documentary The Disappearing Male, which was a documentary featured on Canadian broadcast channel, has noted that since the introduction of these chemicals, there actually has been a decrease in the male population globally. So there's less men being born globally all throughout the world because of these chemicals, because they feminize men's sperm to make them unable to produce a male baby. They cause male babies to be aborted, and not only that, but the men who are born, they have smaller penises, they have all undescended testicles, hypospadia, which again essentially sterilizes them, which makes them unable to produce any babies at all. So that's the way that these chemicals are directly targeting men, and not only that, it also causes some of the mental disorders, which primarily affect men as well, being autism and ADHD. Now, some of the primary products which contain these chemicals that men consume, as I mentioned, the fragrances, so all your little lotions and Old Spice and Axe body spray, all that crap that men spray on their bodies contains phthalates in particular. Beer, so because
Hops. The
Yeah,
hops
hops,
contains large amounts of estrogen.
large amounts of estrogen. But not only that, but the can contains estrogen as well. So that's another product that men consume a lot of that contains estrogen.
If you're drinking
Soda,
beer in a can, you're drinking pretty bad stuff, though.
yeah, you're drinking nothing but estrogen essentially. You're getting a double dose of
Yeah.
estrogen. So not only that, but soda. Men are the biggest consumers of soda due to the corporate advertising. Soda contains large amounts of estrogen, particularly as I mentioned, atrazine, which is from the high fructose corn syrup, and the bottle actually contains phthalates as a whole too. And pizza boxes. So basically a lot of the fast food, the pizza boxes contain a fluoride chemical known as PFOA, which essentially it's like a it's a estrogenic fluoride chemical, and it's made by DuPont. But essentially it's known as PFOA, and they use it like to make a lot of non-stick surfaces. So like a lot of the non-stick carpets is found within that. It's found within non-stick pans. It's found within like your George Foreman grills. It's also found within pizza boxes. It's found within French fry boxes. Again, men are the biggest consumers of fast food. It's found in microwave popcorn because again it's non-stick. So this chemical, which is again primarily found within pizza boxes and fast food wrappers, the McDonald's wrappers and whatnot, that's another source that men are being exposed to this chemical. Another source is Viagra, since a lot of these pharmaceutical drugs are made with enteric coating. It's like a coating which essentially makes a drug break down slower within your digestive system. That enteric coating contains phthalates as well. So a lot of men take Viagra and some of these other sex enhancing drugs are getting anti-testosterone chemical, which again serves big pharma because you have to buy more of the drug, to get an erection. So that's another source. So those are the primary products. Men do use a lot of cosmetics these days as well too. A lot of those body sprays, but those are the primary ways that men are being exposed to some of these chemicals.
All right, and what supplements would you recommend people take to detox the chemicals from the body and to protect their health?
Well, the number one thing is that I recommend is a lot of I use supplements that are rich in iodine because, as I mentioned, a lot of chemicals they harm your thyroid. So it's helpful to consume. Of course, if you're consuming if you're consuming fish, you really need to add extra amounts of iodine. But you make sure you get a lot of wild caught fish in there because that's a good source of iodine. Wild caught shrimp, etc. One of the best supplements to take is vitamin D. Vitamin D helps to block and prevent a lot of the diseases that these chemicals cause because the chemicals are linked with cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, etc. So vitamin D actually prevents close to about 77 different types of cancer. And it's important to specify that I'm talking about vitamin D3. That's it's important because there's vitamin D2, which is like found within nut milks, and that actually lowers your amounts of vitamin D3 within your body. So vitamin D3 is going to be the most important supplement you can take, along with iodine-rich foods. You can also take chlorella, which helps to remove a lot of chemicals from your body. Spirulina, wheatgrass, anything that has like a lot of has chlorophyll in it is going to help detox your body from those chemicals. Not only that, but consuming a lot of cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli, cabbage, kale. I love to eat kale like with bacon fat.
Yeah, just
That's my
yeah.
favorite.
Well, yeah, as long as it's with bacon fat and cooked, but not raw. That stuff's pretty
Yeah, no, no,
toxic.
no. Yeah. I mean, any type of raw foods are natural, so raw foods are bad for the body. So yeah, cooked
Right.
kale.
Yeah. People. For all you hippies out there who think kale's some miracle food, it's actually got huge amounts of phytic acid unless it's cooked, and you can't even really absorb the nutrients without smothering it with saturated fats.
Exactly. So you want to cook it. You want to cook it, and but yeah, any type of foods like that are green have chlorophyll in them. Broccoli, cooked broccoli again.
Sure.
Those things they actually help to detoxify the liver, which the liver is the primary organ which removes many of these toxic chemicals. They strengthen the liver, and they also strengthen the liver's detoxification systems to remove some of those toxic chemicals. So That's why like I said, it is helpful, to consume some of those foods which contain high amounts of chlorophyll. Along with that, cilantro, because a lot of these heavy metals, mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium. Arsenic is found heavily within like brown rice, because of the contamination via pesticides. So so it's really important to also consume things like cilantro. That helps to eliminate the mercury from your body and a lot of those other heavy metals. So those are really along. Also, I wanted to mention probiotics because probiotics help to actually detoxify bisphenol A within your gut. So if you have consuming adequate amounts of fermented yogurt or just fermented foods in general, that'll help to detoxify bisphenol A and some of these toxic chemicals within your gut. And when you're trying to prevent the problems from occurring within the womb, just consume lots of folic acid. And folic acid is primarily found like in oranges, found within green leafy vegetables. That helps to minimize some of the epigenetic changes that bisphenol A causes within the womb.
And I would also think getting back into a high-fat, ketogenic diet state would probably help significantly as well, instead of going the other way and going high grain, high sugar like most people do.
Absolutely, yeah. Because when you do that, you're increasing your levels of insulin, and insulin, in men increases their levels of estrogen, and in women it increases their levels of estrogen and testosterone. So, it has like kind of like, that's why a lot of women, again, PCOS is really insulin resistance of the ovaries. Alzheimer's is insulin resistance of the brain. So yeah, you definitely, want to have a high fat, as you mentioned, ketogenic diet, which would be extremely helpful for, helping your body fight all these chemicals that they're being exposed to.
And how do you remove the chemicals from your water, which is now, as you call it, a chemical cocktail?
Yeah. The best way to do it is to use reverse osmosis water. And reverse osmosis, and what I usually do is I put I'll go to a water container and I'll get a glass jar, and I will go to that, I'll just get a glass jar, no plastics, and I will go to the water machine and just use the reverse osmosis water machine. And I mean, that's the best type of water that I found.
And you can get for $100, you can get reverse osmosis systems that'll fit right on your countertop or whatever too, and you don't even have to travel anywhere. You always have it right there.
Absolutely, yeah, that's something I definitely recommend. So yeah, reverse osmosis water is the best way to remove most birth control, lead, fluoride, chlorine, most of those toxic chemicals. Because of course fluoride's a very powerful endocrine disruptor as well. So that is the best way to remove many of those toxic chemicals. It's not, a lot of this, what the alkaline water. Most of that doesn't remove any chemicals. It just makes the water more alkaline, which I found to be a scam. So I recommend reverse osmosis water.
All right, and let's see. We already covered foods to consume to protect your body from chemicals, right? Did you want to add anything more to that, or to optimize testosterone levels and sex enhancement for men and women?
Yeah, for sex enhancement for men, definitely high fat diet.
Yeah,
You
for
need
sure.
cholesterol. You need cholesterol and saturated fat in order to produce testosterone. Vitamin D also helps to boost testosterone as well. Working out, doing strength training is also great for testosterone. Intermittent fasting is great for testosterone as well. You really don't need to consume a lot of herbs and things like that. It's more so about avoiding some of those chemicals. So avoiding soy, avoiding plastics, because if you're consuming a high fat diet along with cholesterol, you really won't have too many problems with testosterone, particularly if you're, keeping your stress levels down and making sure you work out on a regular basis. So you really don't need to like add any herbs to it. Just add more, healthy fats,
Right.
particularly saturated fats to your diet. Now, as far as ways to remove the chemicals from your body, as I mentioned, chlorella, cilantro, spirulina, blue-green algae. Those are some different supplements that you can take to help to remove the chemicals. Like those help to remove dioxins that's been found. And as I mentioned, vitamin D actually helps to protect your body against those chemicals. And probiotics detoxify those chemicals within your gut. So that's why it's also important to avoid like a lot of chlorinated products and things of that nature because that actually destroys your gut bacteria. But yeah, as far as for that, that's the only thing I really recommend for men is that they, follow a high fat, kind of like a paleo diet,
Right,
and
right, exactly.
do that, then you won't have problems with testosterone.
And of course we see women that are entering menopause in their 30s from a vegan diet, etc., able to reverse menopause by going on a high fat diet as well, and it should help stabilize the monthly cycle, etc. And we've heard over the last 4 years, we've heard from thousands of people that have switched to paleo, low grain diets, and seen dramatic turnarounds. In fact, for my own show, without exception, I've heard of one person out there who went to a ketogenic diet and had trouble, but it was only one, and a strange situation. So, Curtis, well, I suppose we're at the end of the interview here. Did you have any points that you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, just kind of gives people more solutions. You definitely want to avoid, because chemicals are everywhere. So you want to avoid pesticides. You want to eat as much organic stuff as you can. You want to avoid a lot of processed foods, as I mentioned, because processed foods contain a lot of those different chemicals. You definitely also want to avoid GMOs because Roundup is another very, very powerful endocrine disruptor. So you want to avoid all genetically modified foods, corn, soy, cotton. I'm sorry, corn,
Canola.
soy, canola, and cotton. Yeah. You want to avoid all farm raised fish because that contains PCBs. PCBs are another powerful endocrine disrupting chemical as well. So you want to consume wild caught fish. And if you're doing, if you know, you're avoiding as I mentioned, pesticides are major. So when you're consuming those fruits and vegetables, you definitely want to buy those. If not organic, without grown without chemicals, they don't have to be quote unquote organic or whatever, because that's dealing with the government there. You can buy stuff from your local farmers market from local farmers, which are just as healthy as stuff you might find in an organic grocery store. Flame retardants, another thing you want to avoid. So you want to avoid all flame retardant furniture and for flame retardant pajamas. Chemicals are also found within like clothing. Like so, I think Ralph Lauren, Nike, Adidas, some of the other major athletic brands, they use all the feminizing chemicals within their clothing. So it's actually found within like the dyes of the clothing. So, if you can find like, regular organic cotton t-shirts without dyes, that's great as well. It's just important to really detox your household because most of the stuff that we use, from the cleaning detergents, laundry detergent contains some toxic chemicals. That's why I usually use like just like natural laundry detergents, et cetera, natural.
To address that, that's a really good point too, because it's actually really easy to make your own laundry detergent, etc. And one of the best things that people can use for a household cleaner is just simple, cheap old vodka. And it's sterile. It doesn't have a bunch of chemicals and fragrances in it, and it cleans just about everything.
Absolutely. And I oftentimes use organic vinegar as well
Right.
uh, to, to clean up stuff. So yeah, if you're, as I mentioned, the flame retardants, avoid pesticides, avoid nonstick pans, avoid soy, air fresheners, antibacterial soaps. Those are extremely toxic. Anything that's antibacterial, hand sanitizers, extremely toxic. Avoid placenta and placenta extract, which is oftentimes found within women's products. Artificial dyes also mimic estrogen as well. As I mentioned, aspirin, cologne and perfume, the microwave bags, secondhand smoke, oftentimes contains, just don't go in bars where they're just smoking out the place with cigarettes and
And we
whatnot.
should be clear that that's commercial tobacco, and that's another big problem too. When people get like whole leaf tobacco that hasn't been touched by the cigarette companies, it's a wholly different story, and it doesn't stink up the clothes and the house, and doesn't make you cough and all of this stuff. Which is, there we know everybody knows they add hundreds of chemicals to cigarettes. So
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They have tons of like 10,000 chemicals. So yeah, secondhand smoke is definitely bad news. And just be, I mean, the biggest thing, I mean, if you're avoiding I mean, the biggest thing is really plastics. If you can just, do your best to avoid plastics, I mean, that will take you, a long way. That and canned foods. I mean, because those are the major sources of the chemicals that are out there. And filter your water and eat like a whole foods paleo diet, and you will greatly reduce your risk of the chemicals. Hospitals, because like a lot of hospitals, the IV bags, which are used for preemies, those contain phthalates as well. So, if you can focus on having home births instead of being in the whole medical cartel hospital birth industry, because they expose your kids to all types of chemicals. Of course,
Right.
avoid vaccines and pharmaceutical drugs and birth control. And keep in mind that whenever you use birth control, whenever you use a lot of these toxic chemicals that are found, that stuff gets into the drinking water, and then
Right.
the fish consume it. So I think in England, it was estimated that just to clean up the pollution generated from the birth control would cost almost like $14 billion, and that's pounds. So the pound is worth way more than American dollar.
Right.
So that's almost like probably like 20. That's only maybe about 7 million people in the UK are on birth control. Roughly about 30 million people here in America are on birth control. So yeah, that's a recommendation to people.
All right, Curtis, would you like to give out your website?
Yes, my website is I'm sorry, it's www dot drcurtisduncan.com. That's www.drcurtisduncan. That's the website. Facebook page is facebook.com/drcurtisduncan. On Twitter, my name is just Curtis Duncan, Curtisduncan. And my email is dr period, that's dr period, curtisduncan @gmail.com. That's dr period curtisduncan @gmail.com.
All right, and we'll have all of that stuff linked up there. So, all right, Curtis, well, that's a wrap, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh man, thanks again. It's great seeing you again, bro. I appreciate just the opportunity to come on your show and all the support you've given. It's just greatly, greatly appreciated. So, thank you again, and keep up the great work, man.
You're welcome. Thank you.